Yeah, there's a, so there's an accident,
a few years.
and
Like 5-10 years.
one of the best, you know, the field is our rescue location for people that are in dire straits. And they need to get to a good hospital quickly. They were gonna airlift him, but I think because they're having to do CPR, it's hard to maintain that while you're in a helicopter.
Wait, what? Connor, we actually
Right,
did
let's
walk
see.
your mind.
See,
I got your email. Thank you. You ready for the quiz?
Yeah.
Let's go to my office.
oh, I thought we had a quiz on it. Nope.
So the notes are up on the board, Augie. Let's take a look at those.
It says the accident happened just after 6 p.m.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Was it shooting against the hospital time, or was it like the accident?
Oh, it's such a huge thing. It's like when you do them
Whose is that?
No, it's like
Oh,
yeah,
wait,
she's
yeah.
like if you that.
They want to go to BC.
And that's David Johnson. You should announce it to the, I think I wore it last year.
Are you in the bathroom quickly?
Go quickly, I'm gonna get started. Yeah, go. All right, so yesterday, what did we discuss yesterday? Thank you, Augie. Invasive species, right? Everybody got these notes up on the board, correct? I'm gonna erase these notes. Augie, did you capture these notes yet?
No, should I just take a picture?
Yeah, let's do just a quick photo. I am recording class, so it's going to be in a recording for today's lecture. And yesterday's recording, half of it worked, the other half failed. I'm not really sure why. Learning the new technology. But that's the key thing. Then the video is key, Augie. And so your friends and people in here, they'll show you which video to watch. Clarify stuff really well. So today in class, what we're doing is it's going to be a lecture and discussion. We'll have a moment to do think, pair, shares. I'll show you what that is if you don't know what that is. And what we're looking at is competitive models in an ecosystem. We're going to go over terms, make sure those terms make sense. You'll be using examples from the wildlife you represent. We'll keep coming back and forth to the issue of invasive species. We'll keep returning to that. We'll keep returning to your species as well. So today is to really kind of get terminology down. My other goal is that we'll get to a specific concept called Keystone species and tropic cascades. I'm hoping we'll get there, but it'll depend largely on how well it's going with our discussion and the lecture, if it's making sense, okay? That's where I'm hoping to get. So, everybody know where I'm headed? Where do you think I'm going to go on our webpage? Topics to the notes, right? The presentation. And remember, the notes are arranged where you can write on the notes. I will probably do very little writing on the notes, but I will present. I might write one or two notes. I may write them on the board. So first thing I've got to do is connect. All right. Oh boy. I just updated my iPad and now I can't seem to find out how to connect to the Apple TV.
Oh.
What topic is it? The meeting and all these things?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to airplay this stuff. I used to just double click the button. I updated my iPad and now I'm having difficulty. Anybody have an idea how to connect the AirPlay? I don't get them either because they change all the time.
Wait, can I decide which to go now?
Please give me one.
Actually, wait, maybe this one?
May I have some?
I would choose otherwise, can
Should I split one with you?
Yeah.
Or
Okay.
My face was like, it's like good president. I think this is Keystone.
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, anybody know how to connect an airplane with a new iPad system?
Scroll it.
Why do they change things like this? I knew how to do it, now I can't. You know how to do it? Usually I double click and it's there.
Charlotte, come to with me to know your own.
I don't know how to do that. I really don't understand.
Did you yell at her?
No, yes, I was like, that is so unnecessary. Why are you causing issues?
I looked
I
through
don't
this.
remember because I
She
remember.
said she was texting her about something else.
Yeah.
You're okay?
I didn't do that.
She said that? No.
Maybe it'll be down the bottom of this. Sometimes it's-
Should we do it? Give one in your foot.
Oh, no, that's right.
Was that? Yeah.
That's all right, I'm gonna get a, sorry for the delay, I'm gonna get a different device that know how to actually work. Thank you, Apple Updates, that's on video now, YouTube beware. Excuse me for a second, oh gosh.
Wait, are we just
I hate my
I mean, like, I read it to my class
Can we,
Yeah, Charlotte, I'm missing stats tomorrow.
Me too.
because it was
Really?
Where are you? Yeah, I'm so excited to go.
Are you fine?
I know, I'm so excited to let this get
Are you
out of
fine,
here.
Chad?
Who cares?
What?
Oh, that's what happened. I've been packed.
Where are you flying on?
It's Dumbledore, everybody.
Oh, yeah, yeah, it's like,
It's like a smaller for.
yeah,
Being recorded.
it's nice, they don't check my bags or anything.
Yeah, I'm lying.
Just saying.
The usual way is yes.
Connor, dude, let's do the Lebanon airport.
What?
So I'm
Tell them
gonna-
that we were
I don't know
there.
how to do it.
We went to your car and you weren't there.
Oh my god.
Lebanon Airport.
Yes, don't you live in Lebanon?
Yeah, Lebanon. I live in Lebanon.
Lebanon?
Lebanon, it's not the Middle East.
Oh, God, isn't that a place in like
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
it's a country.
How long is
I
that?
don't know.
Yeah, how far is that drive?
To Lebanon? 30 minutes.
Okay, because I'm flying
Are you the only person that has your license?
Are you driving over or are you having someone take you?
I'm only allowed to
I have
drive
a car.
So you're having proctors take
Actually,
you?
like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
They proctor.
But I don't know, I don't think there actually are. I think they have like
Isn't
Uber.
this a thing?
Yeah,
It's
you
like-
know,
We're still eating technology problems. You know what?
Go on.
Their time
We're
is
going
more
home tonight.
important.
Yeah, I know.
I know.
This is one of my problems with our technology.
So don't worry, you ride from proctors.
Okay.
Are you going
Oh.
to what?
Yeah.
So there was a dongle in here. right?
Yes.
Absolutely.
All right, so sorry, this is delayed so much due to technology stuff. So everybody else is able to find this slideshow there, right?
Which one?
Yeah.
Okay, it's community ecology. We're still in chapter 4. It's the one with the picture plant picture, and you go right underneath the photo. Yeah, you can do that, but that's PDF. Do that one and put in Notability, and then you can write on it, and you can keep notes.
And it's
Just
nice to
scoot over
lecture
this
outline.
one.
So you're not putting it on the.
I am, but I just updated my iPad, and now I don't know how to engage AirPlay. They changed it, so I haven't received training. I just can't believe that I have to be retraining things. So now I'm gonna go press here and put it in the Notability, then you can write it. Right? Thanks, Sue. I appreciate that. Didn't expect to have.
No, that makes sense. Mine's like that too.
That's not like that.
I don't think it's only one that's different.
There's another one.
But I got one.
Let's do. I want some.
Again, it's a square one. I thought it lived in here. Okay, so everybody's been able to find it?
Yes.
I like how you showing me the screen. Show me your screen, is what you do, okay?
I've had this up for a minute.
Yeah, okay, so what I want to do is, let's scroll to the slide that has, competition, wait a minute, let me look up.
Competition can occur
Here.
when resources are. Competition can occur when resources are limited.
Yes, competition can occur when resources are limited. Go to that slide, it'll be in blue at the top. So what we're looking at here with species interactions is there's several different ways that species are interacting with each other. We remember the definition of a community, yes?
Yeah.
What's the definition of a community again? You did it the other day.
Species interact.
When different populations, whole populations, different species interact with each other. We're getting ready to do a community study. Let's start next class. And so these interactions can be competitive, and they can be cooperative. Most of science has studied the competition. The cooperation stuff is just coming to light. Because often when we study animals, we often have the human bias as at play. Oh, they're trying to help each other. Are they? What does help mean to a aardvark? What does help mean to a bumblebee? We don't know. And so we often make that mistake in these classes. So with competition, there's several forms of competition we need to look at. There's several forms. And there's some terms here you need to know. Let's go with the first one that's on there. When a species that's the same competes for the same resource. So, DJ, you're a panda, right? You represent pandas?
Yeah.
So when panda A competes with panda B for the same resources like bamboo, that's called intra-specific competition. Right? And you should recognize that word intra versus inter. Right? We looked at that before with sustainable development. Intra-generational equity, intergenerational equity. Ooh. So intra-specific competition is between the same species. What would be some competition you might have? Let's see, I'm trying to remember some animals here. Cobras. What kind of competition might cobras have amongst each other? Can you give us a concrete example of some intra? Right, competition for mates. Good. What animal do you represent, Charlotte? I've forgotten.
A zebra?
Zebra. Do they have another type of competition besides mating between individual zebras of the same population? What would they be competing over? You just one.
Wait, what do you, like?
What would they be competing over? We're all the same species in here. It might be something familiar. Food, yeah. So grass to be specific for, and that's really, and that changes over the course of a year. You might have a drought and grass may be limited, so the competition is worse, right? Everybody here should be able to think of a concrete example of intraspecific competition for their animal. You should be able to have that example. You can write down right there in the slides. Example this with your species, okay? Let's move on to the next term, interspecific competition. Is that on the same slide?
It's on the next one down.
It's on the next one down. Thank you, Ty. So if we go to the next definition there, you can see it clearly written. Interspecific competition is when king cobras compete with zebras. Maybe they don't occupy the same habitat. Let's see. Augie, what animal do you represent again?
Cheetahs.
Cheetahs. So cheetahs and zebras. Okay, let's talk about cheetahs and zebras. They occupy the same habitat. A savanna, a tropical savanna. And so what might cheetah, a different species, a different population, competing with another population of zebras, what might they be competing over? Interspecific competition. Yes, that's good, but remember, now we got to get down to a specific example. What food would they be competing over? Cheetah has its set of food, zebra has its set of food. What are they competing over? In this case, it's probably not food. Space, maybe. What is limited in a savanna?
Water.
Water is. There's a rainy season and there's a dry season in the savanna, right? And so we've seen this on those specials. Maybe seen a Planet Earth episode, and the water all dries up, and there's just a couple little watering holes. And so cheetahs have to go there and drink water along with zebras. And so they're all competing over the one fresh water source in that area, right? Does that work as an example? Now, think about one specifically with your animal. Who might you be competing against directly for resources? Well, they can't be each other because that's intraspecific. So it has to be another species. So like Samantha, you have flamingos. What on earth would be competing with you?
We other.
But we need to be specific, right? If we're gonna do AP college style thinking, we need to get it all the way down as specific as possible. Who are you competing with?
Storks.
She's saying storks, maybe?
That's
What would
probably
be, one way we could do this, we start off with a broad thing, like exactly what they're competing of. We know it's a resource of some sort. Would it be water again?
Could be.
No?
It would be probably like, I don't know, like kind of like food or land.
Does anybody nest in the same habitat as
No,
flamingos?
not
You guys are
really.
specialists, so one of the things that's interesting about animals that have specialized or narrow niches like that, they do avoid that other competition, but they're susceptible to other issues. Okay, so not a great one. Okay, largemouth bass then. Who would you be competing against? Another species,
Another bass species, I guess, not bass.
or even rock bass, an invasive species, right? You should all be able to, unless you're a super specialist, you should be able to think of a specific example for the animal you represent that you're competing against that's not the same as you. Yes?
So for cheetahs, when an inter-specific competition example would be that lions are trying to kill their cubs for food.
No, they need to be competing over the same resource. Are cheetahs eating their own cubs? No. So what do lions eat that cheetahs eat?
Zebras.
Yeah, so you could say that, right? That's bad.
What about,
Yes, Lulu. And then,
So like,
like,
if there's like a koala, because
yeah, you're a specialist. Yeah.
we're a specialist, so would that, for our inter-specific competition, would that be like humans, because we're trying to cut down what they're.
Typically, when we're thinking about this kind of competition, we have humans removed from it. Because what we're looking at is how the system works without the human
I
impacts.
really haven't been able to find like much on competition besides humans, because there's so.
How about an insect species? Is there an insect that predates on eucalyptus? Might be, I don't
What
know.
about
I'm
bees?
reaching too, I don't know.
What
all
would
the
be an
answers.
inter-specific competition?
Honeybees?
Yeah.
Is there any other pollinator that needs a cavity to nest in to create pollen?
What about the
You have an invasive species that affects you. And you're definitely competing against them.
Pardon?
Don't guess, find out. Yeah, this could be an answer for a lot of you. If you can't, I'm not gonna know every answer, so I'm gonna ask you to like investigate it. So that's what we're gonna do for a little bit, is think about and get that down. Yes, what was your question? Oh, you didn't have one. Liza, did you have a question?
Yeah,
I can
it's,
help
no.
somewhat, but I'm gonna make you look. What is it?
I just had a question of mine. I was hippos. So would it be like
They're wild horses.
hippos and like I don't know zebras or something competing for water?
Yeah, if it's water again, yeah, that'd be a good example, because hippos definitely are water-based. There's other animals that occupy the water too. Imagine as that water source gets smaller and smaller,
Yeah.
hippos need a certain amount of space. Every animal here that you represent needs a certain amount of space to meet your needs, to find mates, to find food, to find shelter. And so as that space shrinks, competition increases. So even occupying space is a good example, because you need to know who your competitor is. Just one example or two.
but
Yes?
there are wild horses in Africa.
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
Probably.
I
So
feel
like,
like,
would that not be,
I think there are.
I think there's other wild animals like zebras in an equine group. I think there's a quagga zebra. I think there is a wild ass. There is there's gnu, wildebeest. There's a bunch of different herbivores. So think about your grass and your water competition. You're gonna find a lot. Africa's a easier one.
okay.
So keep thinking about it and get that down there. And notice that I still don't have my access here. All right, so you guys are looking on with me, right? This stinks, I can't project.
Yes.
Is anybody not looking at this online? You are?
My husband's not.
You're not able to load it in?
Yeah,
and-
we would.
Mongoose.
There's too many pages.
Yeah.
There should be a limit.
Yeah, these slides
This
are
is a
really
short
long.
chapter. This
Like
is-
when we study for the test,
Yeah.
are we supposed to like scroll through like 98 slides or 90?
No, like the test is coming up, the chapter 4 stuff that we're doing, it's only gonna be on stuff we cover in class. But chapter 3, I'll have to know all that.
Wait, didn't we
It's chapter
chapter
three.
3 test?
We had a quiz.
Oh, but so
We
the
have a
next
chapter 1, 3, and 4 test coming up.
Wait, what?
I checked the
Yeah.
one and four.
1, 3, and 4.
I mean-
Just a little bit of 4.
Can we have all of them in one week now?
Huh?
Can we have them all?
No, it's all
I think
one
that's
time.
Just one tab.
Wait,
All right, so
That's
the
even
next.
better, actually.
Okay, well,
It's a lot of questions.
Sorry, I like taking two.
All right, so intra and inter-specific competition. These are terms we need to know. And the reason why we have to know them is we're going to apply these terms as we investigate the pond, as we try to understand what the pond is about.
Next week or something.
Ah, there we go.
Why don't you just go
Good,
for all
good.
of them?
All right, let's move on to the next slide, okay? The next slide says, and everybody's able to look along here except for Annie, right?
Indeed.
And who? Anybody else? Okay. So the next slide, and maybe you can look on to Lily's or something like that. And I'm sorry, the technology's not working. I'm really frustrated that airplane. Wait a minute, let me try airplane over here.
yeah, zoom in.
Yeah. This will work. I forgot about airplane on my computer. Duh! It hasn't changed on this device. Here we go.
I'm here.
All right, so Liza, can you turn off the light here? That way it shows up a little better. I think it'll look better. All right, there we go. Hey, look at that. So here's the slide I'm on. So now we're talking about different types of competition. We know that when there's different types of competition. We have interspecies, interspecific competition, intraspecific competition. What are some other forms of competition before we look at this slide? What are some other forms of competition?
What do you mean?
Other forms of competition. Let's go back. We'll go back. Other forms of competition. Like very broadly, we have these two types of competition. We have this interaction I'm sorry, I misspeaking. We have competition, but now we want to explore exploitation or exploitative interactions, and then we'll look at mutualism. Which is a cooperative way. Exploitative interactions are things like predation, parasitism, and herbivory. What the heck is herbivory? Say again, eat what?
Only.
Yeah, this is predating on plants. Okay? This is the science term. You know, like I've said many times, is that with science, we have specific words to describe stuff. So once competition gets really heated, we can have this thing called we have two results. And if I could highlight it, I'd highlight competitive exclusion and species coexistence. Have we talked about this at all?
No.
We have talked a little bit about this indirectly. We just haven't used this term. This describes the end result when there's a very intense competition for resources in interspecific interactions. And our best examples are invasive species.
So,
Yes?
so do competitive exclusion and species coexistence, those are the after effect of only interspecific and not intra.
Correct. Because it's talking about the impact of that species, not of individuals. Remember, intra-specific competition is just between the same individuals in that population of the same species. So like when we go and compete over Honey Nut Cheerios in the dining hall, it's not gonna lead to a species extinction. It may lead to the death of an individual starving to death. All right, so competitive exclusion is when you have a battle between two species. So red panda versus giant panda over bamboo. One of them might be pushed out.
I thought you said there was only one type of panda.
There it is. One type of giant panda. Red panda just lives in the same area. It could outcompete them by taking up space, taking up the bamboo. All right, so let's take a look at. We're going to take a look at competitive exclusion first. Well, actually, I should talk about species coexistence too. So the other effect is that instead of like one going extinct, instead, and this usually is what happens, we have a coexistence happening. In other words, some concessions are made, some needs aren't met. one group does without but can continue to survive. And they create a little bit of an equilibrium. Then they shift around back and forth, and it minimize, and they figure out ways to minimize the competition through adapting to their niche. So let me show you that. So niche is important. We have two types of niches for everybody. You may be specialist or generalist, but there is a fundamental niche and then there's this realized niche. A fundamental niche is the ideal. So like DJ's fundamental niche, let's say in soccer, would be to be the bench captain all the time. No, it would probably be goalie, right? Or all the above. You play everywhere if you really want to do it. You'd be Pele. You know, you'd want to reach your fullest extent. But unfortunately, nature doesn't allow that to happen often. And so usually what happens is that the needs aren't always met and your territory isn't always full. You're not always reproducing your maximum amount. It usually is a realized niche or niche. It is the portion of the fundamental niche that actually is completed. Let me show you an image that's better. You got the slides right there. Here's a good illustration of it. I'm a visual guy. I feel like pictures tell us a lot once we kind of have read stuff and we look at it, think about it. And so here's species one. Let's use let's talk about bats. So the little brown bat that lives in New Hampshire likes to occupy a huge area to fly around in and eat lots of mosquitoes, and it has a hibernaculum, a little cave it nests and roosts in. And here's its full fundamental niche of what it can do. But the reality is, in New Hampshire, there's about 7 to 8 different species of bat, and most of them are insectivores. They eat insects. So competition gets kind of fierce, and so it can't really realize that entire area. It really has to only hunt and get mosquitoes and find a place to roost in this amount of area due to competition. But it doesn't go extinct because of that. It's just limited. So we have our unlimited niche, fundamental, and our limited niche, which is the realized one. And that has happened to all your species. And it continues to get shifted around based off of limiting factors, right? Can you guys name a limiting factor? We've talked about this once or twice. Diseases. Is that density dependent or independent?
Independent.
Density, wait, disease, density, independent? No. Diseases usually are passed around through contact. So it's density dependent.
Yeah, but like stuff like floods and stuff, that would be independent.
That would be independent, yes. A fire would be density independent. Natural disasters that just wipe out whole habitats, doesn't matter how many is there. And ends up affecting everything. Okay? Good. It's good to practice the terms every now and then. Question, yeah?
What's equilibrium?
Equilibrium is balance. Science word for balance. You might remember it from when you discussed diffusion in class. Molecules tend to go from, if they're in a high concentration, they naturally diffuse towards equilibrium from a high to a low concentration until they reach balance. And that's what we're talking about, creating some sort of balance. But it's a temporary state. It'll get changed due to limiting factors, whether it's weather or disease. Okay, here's what a lot of species end up doing in order to coexist is they figure out ways to partition or divide up the resources in a way where everybody's needs are met. Okay, they share the resources. The best example is with birds, and I'm going to go to the image because it's awesome. And in this image we have some of my favorite friends. These are all local birds. You see them here on campus. This is a white-breasted nuthatch, and this is a brown creeper. This is a cool story. This is so cool. And when I see these animals, and I see them around campus, I immediately I know the ABCDEs on them. Remember, I can think like a system. I know what they need in order to exist. And what's interesting is over time, these two animals have evolved to coexist by partitioning, dividing up the resources. And over time, through doing that, they have adapted and specialized to that division. Let me tell you about it. The white-breasted nuthatch will eat seeds and insects, and it usually finds insects under the bark. And what it does is, well, the problem is a brown creeper liked the same stuff. They like to find insects and seeds as well off of trees. So over time, they divided up that resource, and what the white-breasted nuthatch does, and you can witness this every day, is they'll fly to a tree, they'll go to the top of the tree, and then kind of bop all the way down the tree, spot around head first, looking for insects, dipping its bill underneath, bark, all the way down to the middle, and then fly away. And if you watch that nuthatch through binoculars, or you get up close to him, you'll notice that its bill swoops up a little bit. It's like shaped like a boat. It has like a keel shape to the end of its bill, so it can get underneath stuff as it heads down. What's interesting is a brown creeper does the exact opposite, and his beak goes the exact opposite direction. Brown creeper flies to the same tree to the bottom, dances its way, gleaning and hunting for insects from the bottom to the middle, spiraling up to the middle, and then flies away and repeats the process. And its bill swoops the other way. And over time, those two physical characteristics have evolved due to that sharing of resources. Does that make sense? This resource partitioning through time. Same thing with the woodpecker species. All our woodpecker species in North America try to access insects inside a tree with their bill, but they do different depths. This is the biggest. Has the biggest bill. This is a pileated woodpecker. It tries to get ants and things that are deep inside the tree. And they make huge holes. This is a sapsucker. It's not the smallest woodpecker, but it makes the smallest hole. And I'll show you some, we'll go see some of their holes. They're over here on campus. And they just fill these little teeny holes and fill with sap, and then lick the sap out of it, or any insects that get stuck in the sap they're attracted to. So they partition the resource too. They're able to share that resource, and therefore we have a higher density of, or higher biodiversity around trees because of the way the birds are divided up. Hopefully that works. Now let's think about resource partitioning. Do any of you have a specialized way of getting food?
Like our animals or ourselves?
Your animals you represent.
Well, I mean, I don't filter.
Yes. So the flamingo has this filtering methodology of dipping its head upside down and filtering out, was it brine shrimp or something?
Yeah, it's
Or algae?
kind of call it.
Microscopic stuff is able to put. And therefore it's divided up the resources there in the water with other things. Anybody else has specialized in that way it eats? Yeah,
I have venom.
Right. right. So there's a specific way of killing it. Cheetahs too, speed. Where are you, Connor?
Deer.
Deer. Yeah, cool. So over time, this result of resource partitioning, we have a change in their physical attributes. We call it character displacement. It's pretty self-explanatory. That term is not going to come up that often. That's more of a biological term. And so notice the thing that's happened though too. This phrase right here is pretty important about resource partitioning. As they partition resources over time, adaptation occurs, traits are formed over time, and competition now is reduced between the brown creeper and the white-breasted nuthatch. Because the white-breasted nuthatch can only get prey a certain way, and the brown creeper can only go a certain way due to their bill shape. Does that make sense? Any questions before I move on? Exploitation. So there's other ways of exploiting another species. You can eat them or parasitize them. I think predation is the easy one, right? We know what that means, right? Let's see. What is the next thing I really need to talk about? Do we know this? When we see this, we know what this is about? I'll just show you. When you see this graph, do you know what it's talking about? What's the relationship here? You able to see the same graph I'm looking at up on screen? What's happening in that?
population of the hens
Yeah, what about the populations of hares and lynx?
I feel like they grow, yeah.
So we have, in blue, we have the hare population going down and up, and down and up, down and up. And we have the lynx population, notice it's following it, it's behind it, it's going up.
And it's less.
Yeah, it's less. So can you explain that? Why is it, let's do that first part. Why is it less? Why don't they have the same amount of population?
Because with the hair, this is blue.
Yeah, the blue, and there's more hare than lynx.
Because hares are like are.
Because lynx.
The hares are what?
Are selected.
Are selected?
Also,
Okay.
it's like, it's harder to provide like habitat and a lifestyle for a lynx rather than like a hare.
Okay, why?
Because aren't they, hares are herbivores? No, I don't
Hares
know.
are what?
Herbivores?
Yes.
So they have access to food, you know, pretty much every turn, while lynxes depend on hares as a resource.
Right. Okay, what else? It's good. Add to it.
Like lynx eat the hare.
Yes.
Did she just come and say that?
No, but she was talking about the availability of food is different, and the lynx eat the hares. It's good, but there's something about them eating it. Peter.
When the population of the hare goes up, the population of lynx goes up, so there's more food to eat for the lynx.
Right, but why don't the lynx ever number the same number of hares?
Because then they would go, lynx would go extinct because then there wouldn't be any food.
They would collapse.
Are
Also, they need more hares to eat to grow.
Yeah.
If we look at the biomass pyramid, or that energy pyramid, they don't get the full amount of calories either, so they can't reach the same biotic potential. They need more hares to create more lynxes. It's not proportionally the same due to the energy, right? Because as a top carnivore, they're getting the least amount of energy in the system. So why is the lynx are going up after the hares go up? I mean, it might be obvious.
Because once the hair grow a lot, then there's a lot more food to eat, so they'll
Then they go up, and then the hair population
And then
falls,
because the lynx have eaten them.
right? And then the lynx starts to fall because now there's not as much food, and so this is called a predator-prey graph, or a boom-bust cycle, where this huge oscillating pattern appears. And the oscillations are influenced by other limiting factors besides predation, right? What might account for the hair being so low here than the 10 years before? Could be disease.
Could be.
What other limiting factor might be applied? That was good.
I don't know, like a natural disaster.
Maybe there's a fire, a drought. Good. Okay. So other limiting factors are playing here that affect the hares. They may have eaten all their food. Cause them collapse. Do you feel comfortable with that slide? Understand how it works? It's important to know how graphs work. Okay, so let's talk about, let's shift gears. Let's go to Keystone species. So what's interesting about this whole interplay between species is that it is they're managing the food web. Their interactions are creating a food web. I need to go back to this slide for a second. I do want to show you one image of this food web. So we have food webs like this. Okay? Can you all see that all right? Let me get this bigger. And when we look at a graph like this, it's important to know what the arrows mean. Because you may have to interpret a graph like this. I think that you might be able to already. So looking at this graph right up here on the screen, this is a food web. What do the arrows mean? Let's start here. Here's the producers. Phytoplankton. Phyto means plant, means it's photosynthetic. We have grass. Let's just go straight up. What does that arrow mean?
What eats the?
Yeah, food food goes in here. Their bodies go into that. Their energy goes into here. This is the direction of energy. Every time we see an arrow. So notice it goes up, the food chain, these are eating that, that's eating that, these guys are eating that. And so then it goes this way, right? We have what we talked about before. We talked about detritivores and decomposers, right? We know the difference between them, yes? What's the difference between a detritivore and a decomposer?
It breaks it down chemically or it breaks it down.
Okay, so which one breaks it down chemically? A decomposer, which is, which one? The fungus or the bacteria? Through the chemical. Good, good, you got it. So arrows are directional flow of energy. So that's a web, and we can change that web into a pyramid. Let me go to that. So look at that, there's our pyramid, right? What do the numbers represent?
The calories that you eat.
Right, the energy is now the numeric that we can track. And also, these also can represent a population. Sometimes the populations, and we usually weigh populations by biomass, the amount of weight that they have to dry them out, the physical amount of tissue they have, and then it's similar. Is there any time where we don't have a pyramid shape? Let's see if I have one.
Well, what other, like, shape would it be? What's
Well, we can have problems happen. So remember, the thing that's really awesome, oh, I went way too far. Just go back to this. When we look at systems like this is idealized, right? These relationships are shifting around all the time. If I get a fire or a drought, I may wipe out a section and cause a shift of how energy is flowing. So an example of this is, how much time do we have? Yeah, we'll watch a video. I'll give you an example. I'm going to watch a video. This video is incredibly cool. This video is about, when we look at species interactions in any system, not all species are equal. There's some that have more weight on the system than others. So what I want you to do is, if you need to take notes, you can be writing notes during this video, but I want you to watch the video up on screen. I'm going to show you where it lives. It's this one right here, History of Keystone Species, Tropic Cascade. I'm going to erase all this stuff. Our goal in this next video is to listen and be able to define what a keystone species is and what a trophic cascade is. That is the only goal for thinking. All right? I'm going to put it on here and hopefully have the timing right for class. It was a little while, maybe more. See how it goes. Yeah, that's all right. You don't have to watch it all. Please pay attention now. Sound right?
From jungle to desert, from forest to plain, from mountaintop to the seashore. The earth is home to many habitats. And every habitat contains a community of plants and animals. Each community is populated by different species. And each species is present in different numbers. So what determines how many species live in a given place? Or how large each population can grow? The answers to such basic questions about how nature works eluded biologists for a long time, until on this rocky Pacific shore in 1963, young zoology professor Robert Payne pried a purple starfish off the rocks and threw it out into the bay. And so began one of the most important experiments in the history of ecology.
You don't need to know the scientist's name, but knowing some examples of keystone species is important.
So what brought Robert Payne to this rugged coast? And why was he hurling starfish? The answer takes us back a few years to a classroom at the University of Michigan.
a lovely day. The old zoology building in Ann Arbor had a courtyard, and in that courtyard, there was a tree which was beginning to bud out.
Professor Fred Smith asked his students a seemingly simple question.
And he said, class, I want you to think about this. Why is that tree green? And someone said,
Chlorophyll.
Fred said, what keeps the leaves there?
All right. Can we answer? Why is the tree green? She said chlorophyll. So what keeps the leaves there? What's that? Keystone species. Photosynthesis? You're thinking.
Although technically chlorophyll is what makes trees green, Fred Smith was asking a bigger question. He was thinking about food chains.
You obviously had producers. They are the energy suppliers to whatever lives off of them. You have consumers on top of that. And we know herbivores.
The popular idea at the time was that the number of producers limits the number of herbivores. In turn, the number of herbivores limits the number of predators that feed on them. Every level was regulated by the amount of food from the bottom of the food chain going up. But this view didn't explain why herbivore populations don't simply grow to the point where they eat all the leaves on the tree. Professor Smith had discussed this conundrum with two colleagues